Okay, time for an update here. And again, just doing a lot of fooling around with the dashboard. This is a status meter gauge. And I mean, I toyed around with this thing for a couple hours last night and have been toying around with it today. Finally have come to, a compromise. This will work. Still need to come back and maybe center these items so everything is centered in the region block. And of course can do that through some CSS if there's no settings for this, and I don't think there are. And it's just a matter of figuring out the jQuery and the CSS that I want to inject in order to center all that. But that's something we can come back to because this is good enough. And one thing you want to think about when you're creating an application and you have a deadline is you have to make decisions about, what is acceptable, what is good enough. So already I think that I know that in the future I would like to perhaps try some more advanced JavaScript-based charting libraries, and then I can just grab the data I need off a RESTful backend in Oracle. And so that's something I'd love to play with, but that would really kill my timeline for a end of January release date. And so we have to skip that for now and say, that's something we can come back to. If I started down that rabbit hole, I'm sure in my head, I think I could probably do it in a few days to a week. But in reality, it would probably be 2 to 3 weeks of toying around and getting things just right, where I could replace my entire dashboard with a more advanced charting library. This is good enough. So one thing we're thinking about is the aesthetics. We want to be careful as technologists that we don't get too geeky. And what we think is great often is just confusing to others. And so while we want to present a lot of information, we need to break that information up. We need to make sure it's clear and understandable and all that. And so there's always things like changing the names of things and, maybe not even necessarily including a legend. We have weekly gain or loss. There's 2 values here. One is light gray, and that is used to indicate that that's not the thing to focus on. We want to focus on the thing that's highlighted. Also want to be careful about use of colors here, because red usually means often means bad when you're kind of on an alerting system, and green means good. But maybe we don't want to use all of the same colors. So probably going to get rid of this red here. We just don't want to use red unless it's necessary. I'm already using it up here on this status meter gauge so that if you're in a negative value, it's green. If you go up to 1, it's yellow, and then past 1 or 2, past 2 maybe it turns red. And we're using these blocks to kind of break up some of the charts. So we'll probably have to put something else to break this space up. We'll put something in there, and we're just trying to think about the visuals here. Now, the way this is going to work is basically this is going to have a bunch of these gauges up top, and each one is worth a point. And so if it's green, you get a point, and if it's red or yellow, you did not get a point. And maybe we'll change that to a negative point and a 0. Yellow is a 0, and red is negative. I'm not sure. And then what we'll do is we'll chart those scores down here, so you'll have the history up here. So I did put my weight in today, and it was 196. And so we had a big drop, and that's why the daily change in weight is minus 2 pounds. And we might put pounds in there. I think that would be helpful. We can do that, change that to text, and it'll say minus 2 pounds. Actually, I don't know if I can do that and it still maintain the number. So that's the kind of thing. Actually, what you'd want is you'd want a value, and then you want a display value here. And I think I can do a display value. I'm not sure. I'll play around with that some more. And you can see that here's the rolling average is the blue line. And so dropping 2 pounds didn't move that rolling average. And we really want to work on moving the rolling average. And this is why I think that this type of data is good feedback, because it tells me, hey, don't loosen up yet. You need another good day or two of not overeating and maybe getting some exercise, and that thing will start to dip back down. Okay, so let's go look at some notes here. So as I'm working, I'm adding notes. So in my to-do folder on my README, I added a section called value. What is the value of the thing that I'm building? What everything underneath that, features and to-dos and stuff like this, should stem from the values that I'm trying to incorporate into the application. Why are people going to want this? One is it's going to be easy to use, so ease of use. Everything needs to be super easy, very simple, and so forth. Informative metrics with a high feedback loop. And so that's what I was showing you here. You want to be able to look at your numbers very quickly and draw some conclusions about how well you're doing, if you can slack off, if you need to tighten down, that kind of thing. And I want to keep this inexpensive. I already looked into using Twilio, and to send one text message a day per year through Twilio is about $3 a year per user. So if you're gonna, I was targeting maybe like $12 a year for the service initially for the basic service, but that made me rethink. That's kind of my bottom threshold. I really need to have a fairly low cost on that $12. So probably $15 is what we're looking at. But we need to think about alternatives even, and that's something, probably we could eliminate Twilio. We could reduce the amount of SMS messages by perhaps sending an email, and then if an email is not responded to, by say 3 or 4 in the afternoon, something like that, then we send the SMS message, and so then we would reduce our costs there. So these are things we're thinking about as we're building. We're always thinking about these things. So features are just kind of, ideas of what we want. So I want the UI. I need a UI that enters the weight daily. Any missing rows should be interpolated. We need a dashboard. That's what I'm working on. The dashboard should be clear and easy to understand and interpret. That's where I talk about constantly reiterating, is this clear enough? And eventually we'll start having people look at it and use it, and they'll give us feedback, which will help us improve that. So we don't want to spend too much time on that, because most likely, no matter how much time you spend on it, when someone comes and looks at what you've done, they're going to tell you, they're going to give you feedback that you didn't expect, and they're not going to see things that you see. They're not going to understand things. The important thing there is not to get frustrated and think that they're wrong. It's you that's wrong, because the customer is always right. We're going to be able to send daily reminders. Okay, daily reminders should include actionable feedback. So we're going to try to go ahead and draw some conclusions, like you're doing great, you're on track, you need to tighten down, whatever it is. You've got 4 days of you've got money in the bank, you're ahead of schedule, you're doing great, you can cheat, whatever. These kind of things, actionable feedback. Instead of having the user necessarily have to go out and draw those conclusions, we'll use the data to draw some conclusions for the user, and they can go check on that themselves later. And we'll need subscriptions that are validated via tokens, and that's going to be using Gumroad initially. I think logging in via the domain's not working in my auth. I think auth must be tied to domain somehow. I'm not sure. That's a bug. I'll come back and look at that. So we definitely want to work on bugs and be aware of those. And then we've got to do high, none, and low, and then future high and future none. So, that talking about moving to a JS charting library, that's something we'll do in the future, and there's no priority on it at this time. But future high support metric values, and I don't even know what that means. I'll remember that and clarify that. There you go. That's something I just jotted in my head. Support metric. Metric. Yes, sorry. i.e. Kilograms or kilos. So we want to support, obviously people that aren't in America might use kilos to do weight. We don't want to limit ourselves to Americans only. So that's something that needs to happen. We also need to put in support for time zones, and that's something I haven't got to. That's all back-end work that needs to happen. Center the status gauge in region. That's something, it's low priority right now, but it needs to be done. Okay, so let's look at this, what do we call it? Status meter. and just go in and a few things that I've learned here. So here's the status meter. It's basically a region that is a chart type, and we were starting at column 2, column span 2, standard template, nothing unusual there. Go to attributes. We're selecting a status meter gauge. Now here's something I found out. If you put a title in, let's say you're using a label. I'm not using a label right now, but I couldn't get the label to appear. And the trick was to get rid of the title. If you got rid of the title, which didn't appear anyway, so I don't know why this does this, but if you get rid of the title, then the label appears. But the problem is it appears right here in the middle, and if the text is very long, it just disappears, or it gets really small, and I couldn't get the text to appear below it or above it. Really don't know how to do that. So we just went with the region, since you can only put one status meter in a region as far as I can tell, unless it's in a subregion. And we're using the region title. And we could change this to an HTML block and put that in there and maybe hide the region. We can do things later. So that burned me for a long time. And we're doing the circular gauge. Our start angle is -180, and it goes for 180. So I'm presuming 0 is right here. So when we start, it goes -180. That was a little odd, since things normally start at the top. So I haven't figured that out. I don't quite understand that, because here's just a default gauge. And I guess it starts at -1. I guess it starts at -90. That's what it does. Or 90. It starts at 90? Starts here. I don't know. Anyway, that is a little confusing. So I'm starting at -180 and going for 180 for this particular number. And let's see, jump down to our weight change daily. Here's the query we're using. Pretty simple. We've got min value, max value, just hard coded, and our daily delta from our user weight history view, which this view automatically applies, figures out who VApp user is and gets their user ID and stuff. This is something you're going to do a lot. Getting down a little bit of a rabbit hole here, but let's go to schema and look at this view. Okay, so here's user weight history. So we're actually grabbing the user ID from SaaS auth, where the username is equal to lower of VApp user. Of course, if you try to run this without being in Apex, this value is not going to be set, but it is set when you call this from Apex. And so you have app user set in the Apex environment, but you don't have user ID. I suppose there are ways to do syscontext to set that globally. But it wasn't easy, and I have done that elsewhere in another application. I could go back and dig it out, but there's a few steps involved to do that, and I didn't want to remember how to do it. So anyway, this is often you're going to have some sort of view that limits the data to the particular user that's logged in, and usually it's best to use views because you can change them back here, and everything gets fixed there. Let's go back. Okay, wrong window. Okay, here we are. So we're not using label, as I said, where color is by default green, and then we have the threshold 0, 1, and 2, green, yellow, red, and we do have a reference line at 0. I'm not exactly sure what all this, and this is where I'm not showing the label because it wasn't working unless I disabled title, as I showed you before. And it wasn't in the right place anyway. So that's what we're working on. I'm just going to be working through these today, probably just kind of filling all these deals in and getting the score. And in the process, of course, if you ever work with metrics, as you work with metrics, you usually think up new metrics. And so I thought up a few new ones to add, which I think will be helpful to add to the dashboard. So once the dashboard, I'm not necessarily looking for much more than I kind of want it to look substantial. So it doesn't quite look substantial yet. We want it to be like kind of impressive, like, wow, there's a lot of data here. And that's what I want the user to feel, because we're going back to that idea that we want a high feedback loop. We want a lot of people to be able to look at the data, know what they're looking at, and kind of be interested in their metrics in that feedback loop. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to spend probably the rest of the day working on this, and we'll check back in later.